Hello, this is Martha, and I have been percolating on many ideas related to the concept of knowing and knowledge and wisdom, and in particular, I've been feeling into this from a number of angles. Number one is the astrological stuff that's happening at this moment, which I'll go into in 1 second, but also just from a societal level or a collective level, and how historically our world has prioritized and valued different kinds of knowledge and wisdom. And so I wanted to speak on this a little bit. I made a video last week that touched on this, but this week I've been really sitting with these energies. And I think it's coming up partly because this morning was the full moon eclipse, total lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. And as I said in my video last week about the eclipse, these energies of Sagittarius, and then the polarity of Sagittarius, which is Gemini, has a lot to do with ideas around what we know or what we believe or what we think we know or how we conceive of things. Like Gemini has to do with how we take in data, and Sagittarius has to do with how we intuitively integrate that data, and then what we think we know from the data or believe about life. So I'll start by saying something on a kind of personal level, which got me really, really thinking about this, which was last week, a few days ago. My aunt, who I'm really close to, said something to me that really surprised me and, actually really impacted me and kind of woke me up a bit to what I'm doing on the planet and why I'm here and what I'm being asked by the spirit world to do. And also what our world is doing. So what my aunt said was that she brought up my grandmother, her mother, who died 3 months before I was born. She died pretty young, at I think 64. I was born in 1977, so she died 44 and a half years ago. And what my aunt said was that she said, Martha, I'm not sure, but I think that my mom, meaning my grandmother, saw things the way that you do. And what she meant by that, what my aunt meant by that, was that she thought that maybe my grandmother had a sort of mystical or like an ability to perceive things in the spirit world or beyond just the rational mind. And I had never thought of my grandmother that way, because she didn't present that way. She was a kind of Midwestern housewife, had 4 kids, and middle to upper middle class, kind of Caucasian, very upstanding, Christian kind of woman who was a really, really wonderful, good human being, right? And very, very educated, but didn't, so far as we know, talk about the spirit world. She was Christian, but again, wouldn't talk about like spirits or something like that. So when my aunt said that, that really surprised me. But then at the same time, it also actually didn't surprise me, because my grandmother's father, so my great-grandfather, immigrated from Scotland when he was 3 years old. And my great-grandfather's mother, so my mother's father's mother, was from the Isle of Lismore off the west coast of Scotland. And I've gone there twice in the last several years, and when I go there, I feel this, extreme connection to the place, and like everything is talking to me. And I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not crazy. It's an incredibly magical place. And there is there's been a lot of talk in our family that there's a kind of a lore in our family that some of the women in particular in our family who are from Scotland had second sight. So I've often wondered if my own, whatever gifts, the spiritual knowingness, whatever you want to call it, that I seem to be tapped into, is maybe related to my Scottish ancestry, which is, pretty recent. So my grandmother is my direct line to that, and so it would make sense to me that maybe she actually had that too. But given her time of living and her culture, that wasn't particularly accepted, honored, valued, nurtured. She was living as a mother, as a housewife in the 1940s and 1950s, again in the Midwest and the West of the United States, in a world that really valued the rational mind and modernism and academia. My grandfather got a PhD in an agricultural related sciences, and my grandmother herself almost got her PhD actually, which was pretty far-reaching for her age, her time in the 1940s. That's pretty unusual. So yeah, she really, in that time, there's very, very high value on the intellect and the brain and the mind and how we can dissect things scientifically. And so it got me thinking about this idea of knowledge and knowing and wisdom in general. And even today, how do we value our wisdom or our knowing, or where we get knowledge? And what really I'm sitting with is the idea that we haven't really come that far from the 1940s, 1950s, hyper focus on the rational and the mental and the brain and logic and all these things that have been so highly valued in our educational system and our social systems. And I have no issue with education. I have no issue with science. I absolutely love it. My brain works really well scientifically and mathematically, and science has brought so many great things to our world. So it's not I'm not saying anything negative about any of that. But what I am noticing is that, for example, with my grandmother, she's just, one, like a microcosm of us, the rest of us, all of us, is that it's when my aunt said that to me about my grandmother, I felt so sad because, intrigued, but also really sad because the thought that my grandmother might, or any of us might have had this intuitive knowing or this, other way of seeing, some kind of access to the mystical world or spirit world that she wasn't allowed or felt like she wasn't allowed to have or needed to squash, that was, in my opinion, an incredibly magical, needed voice in her. And wow, how sad if that was there for her and she couldn't be that or express that. And then on a bigger level, for all of us, in the last however many, I don't know the history well enough to know, but certainly through the Enlightenment and the Industrial Age and Western European and, the culture, the predominant culture in the United States, Canada, more westernized, quote unquote, westernized nations in this day and age, we have really valued, like I said, the mental, cognitive ways of being and knowing. And even in psychology, I was a therapist for a really long time, and I got my master's degree in clinical social work and top notch clinical program 20 years ago. Actually, yeah, exactly 20 years ago. And even in most modalities of doing therapy and of conceiving of psychological phenomena, there's still an incredible emphasis on the mind and on cognitive behavioral therapies and the academic rigor of the science of psychology, which again, there's nothing wrong with, and there's absolutely a place for it. But there's an increasing awareness that there's also a need to come into the body, and the body awareness, and a lot of somatic therapies have come up. But even with that, there's still not much room as a therapist to address the mystical or the spiritual or the connection to the divine or us as the divine. As a therapist, it's similar to the separation of church and state. It's like, as a therapist, you're really supposed to separate spirituality and being a therapist. You're supposed to fully engage with the person and their spirituality. You're not supposed to push their spirituality away, but there's not, in my training as a psychodynamic focused therapist, I absolutely had no training whatsoever in 20 years ago as in engaging with people as spiritual beings. My training was essentially to meet the client where they are, and certainly if they brought up their own spirituality, to meet them within that and to speak to them in a respectful way that holds space for them to be there. Because as therapists, we don't want to go around pushing any kind of spiritual agenda on anyone, obviously not. But then, and that's very important. But then the downside of that can be that we don't engage with people as spirit, like as them, like beyond their mind and maybe their heart and maybe their body, if we have gotten trained in somatic, somatic therapeutic techniques, which some therapists now have and are, but even that's marginal. But to engage with people as the being that they are, as spirit or as the divine or as existence, that doesn't tend to go hand in hand with being a therapist in this day and age. So so what I'm just sitting with is, what is it that we're missing in that? What that emphasis on the mind and like cognitive ways of knowing things. What are we missing in that? Because in my experience of life and the way that life seems to be moving through me and as me, I seem to be getting encouraged by the spirit world to be less and less wedded to my mind. My mind is still very important. I was, an extremely good student and top-notch academic kind of brain, but the knowing that I'm being asked to really release into and to hold space for others to release into is really about what's coming through lately is, remembering what it is to be nothing. So it's kind of the opposite of using our mind to know things. It's like when we're in our mental brain, it's so easy to have our ego right there, front and center, and to be attached to what it is we think we know. And to have our value caught up in like how smart are we, or how many data points do we know, or just like it's all right here, like our sense of value, our sense of ego, our inflated sense of ego, I don't know, and then this way of knowing in our mind is very powerful and very important, and yet can be missing so much. So when I get reminded to come back to my existence as nothing or as the divine, first of all, my body just like releases and relaxes and lets go, and it's not about me anymore. It's certainly not about my ego. It certainly has nothing to do with whether I'm smart. It's about me coming back into the ultimate state of being, which is me as source and, like the particles of existence, really. And then when I go into that state of being, suddenly I will know things that I could never have thought of before. Absolutely never. My brain would never have come up with that. And I've talked about this before. It's like we know also from neuropsychology that when we are in fight or flight mode, we tend to really reside in our hindbrain, our reptilian brain, and in our survival mechanisms, right? And then when we're able to relax and come into our whole brain, then our whole brain will come online, and our frontal lobe will light up, and we'll be using more of, the whole system of who we are and the brain level. And then suddenly we'll be able to think ahead, think strategically. We'll be able to slow down our thinking and see the bird's eye view and use our logic and, plan ahead logically and not think about just this immediate moment and survival and our survival instinct. So, as I've said before, if you've heard other things I've talked about, is that when I come into that state of nothingness, or into that state of, remembering what it is to be the infinite of the divine, it's like going from the hindbrain to the whole brain to the infinite brain of existence. And so it's like a quantum leap, literally, to the knowingness of all things. And I feel like, to come back to the astrology, I really see this, what's going on energetically in the sky is that we are coming to, Pluto has been in Capricorn for many years, and we're coming to the end of those degrees. Pluto's moving through Capricorn, and it's currently at 26 degrees Capricorn. It's going to still be in Capricorn for another few years, but we're coming into the end degrees of that energy. And Pluto has to do with dredging up stuff that is ready to be released. Like, we don't need that anymore. And so Capricorn has to do with structures of our thinking, of our society, of how we live our lives, of, can be associated, some people associate it with patriarchy because that's the established way that we have been living in. I don't personally think Capricorn, is patriarchy, but I do associate it with patriarchy because it has to do with the structures of our world, and that, like I said, that has been the structure of our world recently. So when I think of Pluto in Capricorn moving into the later degrees of Capricorn, it's like this energy of us as a collective really having a moment to dredge up, like, okay, so what have we been doing? Like, what's working well, what's not working well, and getting rid of the not working well part. And there are so many things in our societal structures that are not working well, and they have not been working well for, I don't know, forever. But it's like more and more and more and more and more and more and more clear and in our face, around, you name it, like gender relations, gender constructs, race relations, power dynamics of all kinds. Pluto has to do with power structure, power, and then Pluto and Capricorn, power structures. Our power structures suck. They're terrible. They're so destructive. They are not helpful on almost any level. And that is really in our faces, right? So I feel like in the next few years, as we move into these last degrees of Pluto and Capricorn, I feel like it's likely to get even more and more and more intense, this sense of what is not working well, and getting rid of that. So as we move into that, right now the nodes of the moon have been in Sagittarius and Gemini, which, like I said at the beginning of this video, have to do with concepts around knowledge and data and how we conceive of things and what we know and what we believe. And so when the nodes of the moon are on that axis, and we're having these eclipses, we've had these eclipses, and right now we're in the middle of a set of 2 eclipses on that axis. It's like we're getting in this opportunity to reorient where we how we conceive of knowledge, or how we conceive of what we know and what we believe, and where we get our knowing and where we get our beliefs. And Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, which is one of the poles of that, where the moon's nodes are and have been for the last year or so. Yeah, actually the last year. Yeah. Jupiter has just, went into Pisces just for a couple of degrees. It was like giving this little tiny boop, this little window into what this Jupiter and Pisces energy is like. And I feel like it's giving us this little nudge, oh yeah, Jupiter's been in Aquarius, which can have to do with the vision, that it is even the vision of divinity. But then when it pops into Pisces, it's like the vision then needs to dissolve into the nothingness of the divine. And so our ultimate knowledge, again, like even when we get these beautiful, wonderful visions, the Aquarian, Uranian visions that absolutely might be, where our world needs to go. That Aquarian energy and that Uranian energy can have to do with incredible innovation, incredible like seeing of what the divine truth is. But then even that, we need to take a moment and just release it to the divine. Like release that into the nothingness so that we can come into the truth of the somethingness. That's what one thing I keep hearing is you need to release into the nothingness in order to come into the somethingness. So I feel like right this moment we're getting this little blip, this little sneak peek into what that releasing into the nothingness is, and through the Jupiterian and Sagittarian energies. And then next year the nodes of the moon are gonna move into Taurus and Scorpio, and the south node of the moon is going to be in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto, which is well, like I said before, is in those last degrees of Capricorn, right? So it's like it's all tying together, and I feel like this moment when we are still with the nodes in Sagittarius and Gemini, in particular, as we're having these eclipses right now, kind of bringing the nodal axis of the Gemini Sagittarius polarity, kind of bringing it slowly to its close. I feel this message of the spirit world saying how crucial and how important it is when we live, if we're here to live as beings of the divine, which we all are, no matter what we are, who we are, we all are the divine. But some of us are really being called to live in a conscious way, fully aware of ourselves as the divine and as earth beings. And for those of us who that's true for, there are certain kind of like life skills that the spirit world seems to be saying are really key, like really important. And this is one of them that they're saying this is really, really important, to come back to the nothingness that is us, over and over and over and over again, because our brains are so cool, so beautiful, really literally a divine tool, and yet they're incredibly limited. So our ultimate brain, our ultimate way of knowing is actually us as the divine. And when our world is moving through this time of, next year and the year after that and beyond, of really dredging up like what is working and what is not working in the systems of our world, and what we're here to do, as we're letting go of what is not working in particular, it's like we need to be super clear in our own anchor of wisdom in the divine, and to not be going from our brains only, to certainly not be in our ego about any of this, because we're not here to be human egos. We're here, at least speaking for myself, I don't think I'm here to do that. I don't think most of us are here to do that. Again, speaking for myself, but I think this would resonate for a lot of you. I am, and I think a lot of you are, here to be actual agents, whatever you want to call it, servants, beings of the divine, actors of, beings of the light and of the divine in a grounded, present way. But I am very committed to living the wisdom and the knowing and the will of the divine, not the will of Martha or the knowing of Martha, which of course, again, they all have their place, but that is really my intention and my surrender in my life. And so to that end, I also actually channeled a video that is free for all of my Patreon members this week, at the $10 a month level and up, but that's available for anyone for $20 just as a one-time thing, on my Teachable site, which you can access through my website, livingtheonelight.com. And it is the spirit world channeling one way of coming into that nothingness place. So if that calls to you, if that's, like a life skill that you feel drawn to, or that feels important for you in this moment, I'd love to welcome you to that. And again, you can either access it for free by joining my Patreon membership for $10 a month, or just paying for that set of videos directly for $20, and you can access all of that at livingtheonelight.com. And I'll put a link to all of that below. And feel free to email me with questions. I'd love to hear your experiences. I think this will be a running theme in my videos for a little while, because it feels so important. And there's so many ways for us each to access the wisdom of the divine and the wisdom of who we are as the divine. So this is just one way, and it's a way that the divine is asking me to share and to provide as an opportunity. But I love hearing about other ways, and I would love to hear yours. And but I'm here to support you if you would like that support in finding your ways. And so don't hesitate to connect. I will see you soon. Yeah, you can reach me at, again, livingtheonelight.com, or my email is livingtheonelight@gmail.com. And I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening.